Okay, maybe I should start at the beginning. Last week, I decided I wanted to build a bike ramp. I tried that last year, but the ramp that I made just was not well thought out, so this time I decided I'd follow some plans. Well, kinda. I found a channel called Lunch Ride that has a video on building a cool jump and landing ramp that seemed doable. I'm gonna link to that in the video description, so go check it out, because that's the person who actually knows what they're doing. But this channel is not about knowing what you're doing, so let's just dive in. I immediately deviated from the plans by using a 5-foot length for both ramps rather than the prescribed 4'6" for the kicker and 5'11" for the lander. I already had 2x8s in that 5-foot length, so basically I was just being lazy. My first real task was to cut out the curve that is the kicker ramp's radius. This went poorly. I'm really not experienced with a jigsaw, and I bent the blade without realizing it, ruining the entire board in the process. After that inauspicious start, things got better. My next 2 attempts at the curved radius cut weren't perfect, but they were good enough to use for the kicker, and the entire rest of the build is straight cuts. Much, much easier. I cut the legs to length, measured them to check the angles, since I had deviated from the ramp lengths in the original plans, and then made the angled leg cuts. I also skipped some of the extra leg elements from the original design, just for the sake of making the ramps lighter and easier to move around. The ramps in those plans are definitely bomb-proof, but I'm pretty confident that mine will be strong enough to hold up to my riding even without that extra support. I attached the kicker ramp legs and then used a 2x4 to trace a straight line from the feet to the other end of the ramp. This ensures the ramp will sit level when it's on the ground. Once I was satisfied that everything was straight, I made the cuts. I followed a similar procedure for the landing ramp and cut out the supports. And I'm not showing all of this step by step because it's already in the Lunch Ride video and plans, which you should follow instead of me anyway. But once I got the supports in, you can see pretty much exactly how this kicker and ramp combo will work. All that's left is to start chopping up the 2x4s and screwing down the actual riding surface. But that's boring to watch, so let's cut to the chase here. These actually came out pretty well. There are a few things I'd change if I were doing this again, but I'll talk about those at the end. First, let's see how this thing rides. Winter in Maine being what it is, for the time being I had to set them up in our driveway, where the run-in involves crossing an active street, and the run-out requires some fast braking. I placed them pretty close together to start, and started getting a feel for it. At first, I wasn't getting any real distance or height. I started just trying to focus on keeping my eyes up and pushing the bike out when I lifted off of the lip. As I got more confident, I moved the kicker back a bit, and then later a little bit more. As you can see, by the end, it was looking quite a bit better. The gap distance is still pretty small, but I was consistently overshooting the landing. I'm still not getting a ton of distance or height, but it's getting better. And that's just over the course of one session in a less than ideal location. I am really psyched to have these ramps to practice and progress with. They're light enough to lift and drag around, so I'm guessing I can set them up in some pretty cool ways once the snow melts. And they'll even fit in the back of my truck if I ever wanted to bring them somewhere else for a session. There are a few things I do differently, but before I talk about that, I just want to shout out Lunch Ride again for the great video and plans. I didn't follow them precisely, but thankfully this ramp is designed well enough that even my close enough approach produced a great result.
So before my battery dies, I just want to mention a couple things that I would do differently if I were building this over again. To be clear, it's working great as is, obviously, but if you're going to go ahead and build this, a couple things you might want to think about if you, like me, are going to not follow the instructions. So one thing is, since I made this longer, mine is 5 feet in length, I didn't really think about the spacing between each 2x4, and I just did like a ½ inch of space in between each. And I also started putting the 2x4s on from that end. So then I got down here and I discovered, we've got this extra space. So I have this extra decking plank that was just lying around anyway. What I probably will do is actually cut it down and just attach that, although honestly, even just throwing it here on the ground like this works perfectly fine. So I don't need to do that, but I might do that. But if you put a little bit more thought into your spacing, you won't have to confront that problem to begin with. The other thing is that all things being equal, I think probably you could get away with decking planks for this whole thing. I don't think you need the strength of 2x4s, and using the decking planks would make it quite a bit lighter to move around. They're also a little bit wider, so you need fewer cuts. So that's something to consider as well. Other than that, yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I hope if you're going to build it, do a better job cutting the curves than I did. That shouldn't be too hard for you to do. But yeah, I mean, if I can make this, anybody can. And based on today's experience practicing out here, it already just feels great, and I feel like I'm going to learn an absolute ton from this. So if you're thinking about working on your jumping this year, I would definitely recommend it. If this is the level that you're at, like me, if you're a total beginner, having something like this in your yard that you can just practice all the time is super, super helpful. Anyway, thanks for joining me today, watching me do some tiny little jumps and build all this stuff. Appreciate you sticking around. Hit like, hit subscribe, hit all those things. And until next time, I hope you can get outside and ride, and I'll see you next week.